our first 10 weeks in Portugal were really hard. You know, 5 weeks for me in the hospital and then 5 weeks for our baby.
Hey expats and travelers, I'm Kalie with Expats Everywhere, and today I sit down with Mariam, who is a serial expat. She has so much wisdom and advice and experience that if I were moving abroad for the first time, I would definitely want to see what she has to say because she just knows so much about it. Well, she's currently living in Portugal, and we talk about some stuff that we've never talked about in any of our other interviews about Portugal. Things like medical, schooling, and so much more. Mariam, thanks so much for joining us on Expats Everywhere. So let's just jump right in. You have been an expat for a while. You currently live in Portugal, but talk about your expat life. Where have you lived? How long have you been abroad? Tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I like to joke that I've been an expat from birth. Because when I was born, and I'm going to tell you exactly how old I am, in 1982, back then it was my parents who were the expats, Kalie. So we are a Pakistani family, and back then it was my dad who had moved abroad for his job, and he and my mom were living in the Kingdom of Bahrain, tiny country, lots of oil, and so they were the expats in the early 80s. And when my mom was expecting me, she decided to go back to Pakistan to give birth to me there. So I was born there, and then when I was 4, almost 5 weeks, we all went back to Bahrain and continued our expat life there. My parents lived there for I think over 7, 8 years, but I only lived there for 2 years, and then the next posting my dad had was to New York City, so I moved to New York when I was 2. I lived there for a while, and then eventually we did repatriate back to Pakistan. So my childhood, especially my early childhood, was quite global, and it was between Bahrain, the US, and Pakistan. And then when I was 19 years old, almost 19, I decided just by myself to leave home and go on this big, grand adventure, go live a life abroad. So I had a blue suitcase and a one-way ticket in my hand, and I arrived at Boston's Logan Airport shortly after 9/11 had happened.
Wow, that must have been crazy.
Kind of a crazy time to be doing that. And I think, you know how it is when you're a teenager, you're like, yes, this is an adventure. But in hindsight, I think it's probably more nerve-wracking for my parents, and I say this now as a parent myself. So yeah, and then that's just started off this whole life of continuing to move. So I started moving for my own studies, my own, job, career. I was in Massachusetts. I then moved to the UK. I studied a bit more there. I met my half German, half Italian husband in England, and then continued this whole process of moving and expat life. And, for a while, our lives were between Boston, Berlin, and Brighton. And then after we got married, I ended up moving to Germany. So I left the US in 2006. And I just realized that today is the 4th of July, by the way.
Yeah, happy 4th.
It's been such a long time since I've been back in the US. But I was working in Houston, and I left Texas and moved to Berlin. And that was probably the toughest move, because when you move for love, it's a whole different ball game. I felt completely stripped of my identity, had to start from scratch, gave up my 6-figure investment banking job, and felt illiterate from one day to the next, because there I'm in Berlin and I can't even read the newspaper or, figure out what's being said, at the train station, or just some mundane announcements. But, you're just not able to understand anything. So that was quite a stressful transition.
Yes.
And I mentioned that because I think a lot of people go through that. A lot of expats go through that, especially a lot of expat women go through that. So it's a very normal thing to go through. But back then I was like 23 and naive and didn't know anybody else who was doing this. So we lived in Berlin, and I started learning German. And as soon as I learned German, my husband found a job in Copenhagen and Denmark.
Of course.
Story of my life. So we moved to Copenhagen, lived there for 4 years. I loved it. The winters were rough. We wouldn't see the sun for 3 or 4 months, but, kind of got used to that, and really had a good time living in Denmark. And then I was about 5 months pregnant in Copenhagen with our first, when my husband came home with a big box of Danish pastries and said, "What do you think about Singapore? Like, what if our first child is born in Singapore? Because there's this great opportunity through work." And, that I have to admit that was a bit of, the first time I hesitated, because when you're pregnant, it's usually a time where perhaps you're feeling a bit less adventurous, or you want to stick to the country that you know, and the medical care and the healthcare system that you're familiar with.
Did the pastries help, though?
Yeah, they did. And we ended up moving to Singapore. So our first child, our daughter, was born there. And we lived in Singapore for 3 years, really had a great experience. I became a mom there. It was just such a great time. And I didn't want to leave when a great job opportunity came about in Dubai. And I'm not really a big Dubai fan, so I said no twice.
Okay.
And then in the end, of course, I was pregnant with our second child. And you can see the theme developing here. I'm always pregnant during the international moves. And like as I'm talking, I'm thinking, okay, this is time to stop this tradition. But yeah, we ended up moving to Dubai. I was about 5 months pregnant with our second baby and had a toddler and arrived in the middle of the Arabian desert, 45-degree heat in August.
That's a rough time to be there.
It is. It's like someone's just holding a blow dryer to your head, you know, holding you hostage. But yeah, we lived in Dubai for 4 years and I grew to love it. You know, some places aren't really a good match for you, but you find things you can appreciate about it. So that was sort of my relationship with Dubai. And I kind of liken my expat life to like having relationships with different countries and cities. So that one was a complicated one. But we left Dubai in 2018 because a great opportunity came to move to Ghana.
Okay, all these great opportunities.
Yeah, and I think when you know, you're excited, you want to see the world and you want to show your kids, you know, a different way of life. And I felt like Dubai was this air-conditioned bubble. I mean, you've lived in Singapore, so you kind of can understand what I mean. And we wanted just to show our kids that there's more to life than 5-star hotels and chocolate fountains and, you know, valet parking. So we took them to West Africa and gosh, that was such a great experience. A big adventure. We lived in Ghana for 2 years, sadly. We were supposed to do at least 3 or 4, but COVID cut down our time there. And so we moved to Portugal, to Lisbon last year in July. So I've lived in 10 countries to answer your question.
Yeah, that's crazy.
10 countries, 4 continents. And I don't know how many cities. Let's not go into the cities. I think about 13 cities, perhaps.
Okay, so that's amazing. And we'll get to talking about having kids abroad and hospitals and stuff like that. But I would say, you know, your parents, it was nerve-wracking for them when you left when you were 19. But surely they couldn't have been surprised that you wanted this expat life because they had exposed you to that, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I think you bring up a really interesting point because I think once as a parent you raise your children abroad, they could go either way. Sometimes kids are like, I love this life. I love exploring a new country and learning a new language and experiencing something new. And sometimes, depending on your child's personality, they might say, I hate moving. I hate having to say goodbye to my friends. I just want to be in one place. And so, you know, you really don't quite know how your kids are going to turn out. That's sort of been the case with me and my sister. She has stayed in Pakistan ever since.
Okay.
And I'm here in my 10th country. And, you know, it's interesting because sometimes you can have the same upbringing, but people would choose different paths, even siblings. So
that's true. So that brings me then, I think, you know, to my next question. What do you think motivated you to be an expat, to live this life where it's okay if you move every few years or you go to a new place 5 months, 6 months pregnant? Like, what do you think motivated you to have this lifestyle?
I think it's quite frankly just that thrill of living outside your comfort zone. I feel like that's where all the magic happens. You're in a new country, you've got a strange new currency in your hand, you're fumbling through, you're not quite sure how much change to put on the counter. You have a new language to learn, a new culture to understand, you know, a new grocery store to conquer and figure out, well, how much should I pay for an avocado in Accra? Like, what is a good price, right? Especially if you're out in the markets. And so I like simple things like taking the right bus or the right train can be such huge things when you're an expat and you don't speak the language, you don't know where to go or how things work, and you have to learn everything from scratch. So for me, it's really about that thrill, that I just love that constant process of taking a place that I know nothing about and then making it my own and really turning it into a home for me. And I think that's the process that I really enjoy, but I will admit that in having to say goodbye to it always tears me up. It's never easy. And so that is definitely something I struggle with.
That's a good point. I like how you put it, because Josh always talks about this tension of like trying to find the right bus or the money, but I like how you put it a bit more of like the magic and the thrill. I think that's better put, because he talks about this tension and I'm like, I don't like that tension, that like nervousness, but like
Yeah.
the magic, or it's almost like those little wins, like when you get it
Exactly.
right, or when you
Exactly.
do communicate in the other language, and even though you fumble through it, but it works and you get what you
Yeah.
need or whatever, or you figure something out. It's those
Yeah.
little wins that just kind of make you feel empowered.
And I think those are the wins that we have to like give ourselves a pat on the back and
Mhm.
say, wow, I figured this out. Because if you're in your home country and everything is familiar, you don't go through those experiences.
Right.
And what I've learned, Kalie, is that when you're going through these experiences, when you open yourself up to those opportunities and those possibilities, that's when the change is happening. So expat life really, yeah, you've changed your scenery, but the more important and interesting changes are happening within you. The adventure is actually happening inside of you. And so my whole take on expat life is not that, I'm moving to country X or country Y or country Z, but how is this also changing who I am? Who am I becoming as a result of all these moves? Who is my family becoming? How is our family culture developing? Who are we as a result of this global life and this mix of countries, cultures, identities, languages, and sense of
all
home?
of it, right? Yes, and we'll touch on this again in a little bit about how we feel at Expats Everywhere that living abroad transforms your life. And so you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and get to Portugal, though.
Sure.
Why Portugal?
I think Portugal, well, it's one of those, places that everyone wants to move to. But I have to admit that was not the way we moved to Portugal. For us, this was a corporate move. And so my husband, we moved here because of his job. And we've been moving, our past 5 expat moves have been because of his job. And as I was mentioning, he works in international shipping. So we got posted every about 3 to 4 years on average to a big city with a big port. And just before COVID hit, his company made Lisbon their headquarters for managing Europe and Africa. And that's how we ended up moving to Portugal for his job. So for us, it wasn't like we always wanted to move to Portugal or that it was something we'd been planning and researching. I mean, for us, it was, I think, a choice between Portugal or Panama. It just happened to be Portugal. So,
and kind of in a dramatic fashion, right? I mean, let's go ahead and talk about, like, a lot of people think of moving to Portugal, they retire, it's this dream they have, or they just work remotely and they get here and it's so exciting. But yours was pretty dramatic with Ghana, Portugal. Why don't you go ahead and explain a little bit of what happened in your story?
Sure. People were asking us, hey, how's the move going last year? And we were just joking, saying, everything's great. We just don't know if Ghana will let us out or Portugal will let us in. Aside from that, swell. But all jokes aside, as anyone knows who's moved, especially within the last year in the middle of this pandemic, it's just added that whole extra layer of complexity to making an international move, and that added complexity to being an expat and living an expat life. And so we were in Ghana, we were in Accra, and the border shut down, so we couldn't get out. There weren't any commercial flights or anything happening. And in the end, we had my husband's company and our embassies, German, Italian, Pakistani embassies, working hard to try and get us out of there because I was in a high-risk pregnancy with our 3rd child.
Of course, pregnant.
And I had a very short window of opportunity to move, to leave Ghana. And we wanted to time it with the 2nd trimester and make sure that, we could make the move then. And I was on bed rest literally until the move happened. So it was a really crazy period in our life, a crazy move. I don't even know if I should call it a move because in the end, it wasn't actually a medical evacuation that happened. We were evacuated through the Italian embassy since we were all Italian citizens, and they chartered a flight to get Italian citizens living in Accra out of there. And so we were lucky enough to get 4 seats, and we got evacuated to Rome right about this time last year.
How long were you in Rome for before Portugal?
Not very long, because we couldn't. So we have like family in Rome, and we couldn't see anybody because it's the height of the pandemic. We're not allowed to leave or do anything. And we were going to go to Germany, where my in-laws live, where my husband's parents. And so we quite quickly made our way to Germany. We took a flight from Rome to Frankfurt, and then from Frankfurt over to Hanover, since they live between Hanover and Berlin. So we made it there, and we were there for just a week, and then we decided to come to Lisbon to sort out some paperwork and, take care of a lot of tax and bureaucracy. We had a lot of logistical issues to solve because when you're an EU citizen, but you're moving to an EU country from a non-EU country, your shipping container can be taxed and all sorts of things can be done. And we had to be here in person to sign customs documentation and all sorts of fun bureaucratic processes.
Gotcha,
So my husband and I decided to come here a bit in advance to take care of all of this. Left the kids with their grandparents in Germany. But then, as you know, on day 4, I went into preterm labor.
Oh, gosh.
Which was really, really stressful.
Yes.
I won't lie, Kalie. Even as a seasoned mover and used to moving while being pregnant and starting a pregnancy in one country and giving birth in the other, it was tough. It was tough because one minute I was opening up a bank account and getting my NIF number, like things you do when you're in a new country. And the other, I'm just, I'm in an ambulance being rushed to a maternity ward in Lisbon.
Wow.
And I think the most stressful part was not knowing the medical culture, not speaking the language, and then having to advocate for myself and my baby without any support because my husband wasn't even allowed inside. So I literally was like, placed in that emergency situation, and that was really, really hard. So it was a stressful beginning to life in Portugal.
Sounds like it. So I'll have 2 follow-up questions because a lot of people are interested in hospitals and the medical stuff here, and then also kids, since you have 3 now here in Portugal. So hospital-wise, you had to be an advocate for yourself. You're worried about the language. How did it all end up? Were you happy with how it ended up? Tell us about your experience.
So it's my 3rd child, so I pretty much know, I'm experienced with childbirth. I know my body. I know what my, medical history has been. I know what to expect. I've been pregnant in like 5 different countries. So all that to say that I really knew what to expect from the process. But in Portugal, I'll be quite frank and honest, and especially in the middle of the pandemic, their policies towards maternal health care truly did feel like they were stuck in the 1950s. Very old-fashioned when it comes to birthing, when it comes to maternity, issues, pro-breastfeeding, which is great. But just the whole process of giving birth was extremely, extremely old-fashioned. And keep in mind that I had planned to give birth at a private hospital, but because I went into labor at 26 weeks, the private hospitals here aren't geared for any kind of medical emergency.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
So they always send you, in such cases, they always send you to the public hospitals, which ironically are better geared for handling any kind of emergencies.
That's crazy.
So, yeah. So in the end, I was actually sent to a public hospital, which kind of explains perhaps a bit of the rigidity, a bit of the old school thinking that permeated through childbirth and the whole process. And keep in mind, it was an extremely stressful situation. My water had been leaking, so I couldn't be discharged. I had to be in the hospital. But I'm away from my kids, away from my husband. I spoke maybe 3 words of Portuguese. I think I knew hola, obrigada, and de nada at that point because I'd been in the country for literally 4 days.
Yeah, which really isn't going to get you anywhere.
No. And I felt like it was really like, and people will look at me, like the doctors and nurses, and be like, who is this crazy woman who A, moves when she's pregnant, B, shows up and is asking us all these questions about how we're doing things and what we're doing, because they're not used to that. And it was just a really difficult process. But I found that once I explained my situation to people, they were very empathetic. And they were a lot more empathetic when they realized that, okay, this lady, she's literally just arrived and finds herself in an emergency situation. So, we're not going to berate her for not speaking the language because this is literally a medical emergency. So I found that once they knew the context, I got a lot more support, empathy, and I made sure to ask for psychological support, talk to counselors, talk to psychiatrists, because there was definitely trauma involved finding myself in that situation. So I think the Portuguese medical system can be a little bit tricky to maneuver, especially if you're thrown into it like I was. But on the other hand, the good part was that I learned the ins and outs of it very quickly. And I think sometimes as an expat, and especially if you're moving in COVID times, you need to get acquainted with the new healthcare system in your new country pretty quickly. And so this was sort of a crash course for me. And so I tried to look at the positives that came out of that experience and think that, okay, you know, I'm understanding how things work. I'm being my best advocate, advocating for myself, you know, and all of that. So it did feel empowering, but in the end, it was just a very stressful birth. We had an emergency C-section at 30 weeks and 4 days. And so as a result, my baby had to spend the next 5 weeks in the NICU. And if you just think about it, Kalie, having a baby in the NICU is tough, even if you're in your home country and you can speak the language and you have your whole support system next to you. But imagine doing it in a foreign country. You don't know anybody because you just moved here. And having to figure out NICU terminology in a foreign language. I won't lie, that was a big stressful challenge that we faced and that I faced. So our first 10 weeks in Portugal were really hard. You know, 5 weeks for me in the hospital and then 5 weeks for our baby. But everything said and done, I think we received really good care. And so I think the end result I can, you know, share is that I feel like the public healthcare system, while it doesn't really look after your, you know, mental health and all of that in a way that you might be used to in other countries, but it does deliver on the medical part, and you can expect good medical care. And my baby's doing really well thanks to the care he received. So.
Okay, well, that's great news, obviously, that he's doing well, and then just good information for our viewers about kind of some things to expect. And I guess a quick follow-up, how was their English? Like, once you were able to kind of explain my story, I've just gotten here. How did you find the nurses and the doctors in the public system? How was their English?
I think it really depended on luck. Sometimes you would get someone who spoke great English and would really take time to explain everything to you. Sometimes you didn't. You weren't so lucky. Sometimes the nurses, especially, they didn't have enough English knowledge or enough medical terminology in English. They didn't know enough to be able to feel confident to explain to you what was happening. So they would call for help, which I thought was okay. You know, like I said, don't worry if you can't speak English or you can't explain to me. Just see if there's a colleague of yours who can, you know, maybe help me understand what to expect or what's going to happen next. And I think this is really important. Like when it comes to languages, you're in a new country. Of course, you're going to learn the language. Of course, that's a great thing to do. I speak 4 languages, almost 5, and I butcher maybe about 5 others, but that's a whole different story. But, you know, so I knew, like, of course, I'm going to be learning Portuguese, but right now, like, it's a do or die situation, right? And I need medical care in a language that I can understand. And studies show that, you know, the results of medical care are better when the patient can understand what's happening and it's explained to them. So, you know, I really tried to make sure that if somebody wasn't there who couldn't speak to me or, you know, tell me what was going on, somebody else could come and step in. And so, you know.
So good to know. And then we'll talk about kids schooling in a second, but kind of a segue, how do you feel that medical is for your kids with the typical things that you would need to do, maybe like vaccinations, normal vaccinations, normal health checks that you have to go through for kids? How is all that?
It's really good. I mean, I have no complaints. We have an excellent pediatrician for our baby, for instance. Again, she's a specialized neonatologist pediatrician because he was a preemie. But, you know, really, really good. I have, like, I think no complaints. I think sometimes the only thing sometimes that makes me chuckle are the cultural differences in parenting. Like his pediatrician will be like, oh, he's 10 months, you should expose him to white fish, you know, first soups and then white fish. And that's a very Portuguese diet, right?
Yes.
So I just sort of chuckle because I've given birth and raised kids in so many different countries and cultures, and I can see the different cultural differences, even when it comes to, like, you know, weaning or like how they would approach that. But in terms of medical care, no complaints. I mean, we had an NICU experience here, so beyond just the normal and the ordinary, and it was really, really good.
Okay, good. So let's talk about schooling then. Explain what type of school your kids are in. why you chose that experience. What can you tell us about schools here?
I think for anyone moving to Portugal, you're going to be confronted with so many different options in terms of schooling. So you've got the international schools, you've got the local Portuguese schools, which are the public ones, and then you've got the private Portuguese schools as well. So there really is a lot of options. There are so many options out there for you to choose. I think it really depends on how long you want to stay in Portugal, like what your intentions are. First of all, if you're moving to Portugal and you're like, well, this is it, I'm going to raise my kids here and we're going to be here, you know, until they graduate high school or, you know, whatever it is, then I think you're looking for the long-term options. And I should just add that international schools are quite expensive here. Like that's just a reality. So not everybody can afford it, especially not afford it for maybe 5-7 years or however long your child is going to be until they reach high school or graduate from high school. So that's definitely a factor to consider. But in the end, we decided to put our kids in international schools, because they've always been in international schools since, you know, since Singapore, Dubai, and Accra. And for us, like we're raising typical third culture kids. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
Yes.
Okay. So for TCKs, it's really important to have people around them who are similar to them, different countries, different backgrounds, not from one single place, have had schooling in different places, because that's really who in the end they bond with. So if I had put my kids in a very Portuguese school, they would definitely stick out. Keep in mind, again, my kids on paper are German, Italian, and Pakistani. They've never lived in either of those 3 countries and have been born and raised in Singapore, Dubai, Accra, and now Lisbon. So my 9-year-old this is her 4th country to live in. And, you know, putting her in an international school means that she can hit the ground running. It ensures continuity of academic systems and continuity of curriculum, because if I had put her in a local school in each of the countries, we would have had 4 different, you know, educational systems to conform to, which is a lot, right? And if you're an expat like us, a long-term expat or a serial expat, as I call ourselves, then you want to ensure that continuity in academic, you know, curriculum or systems, right? So that was one of the reasons why we chose an international school. And the other reason is that language is, of course, super important, but our kids, you know, were doing Mandarin and English in Singapore, Arabic and English in Dubai, French and English in Ghana, and now they're doing English and Portuguese here. So for them, it's like, yeah, okay, no big deal, you know. Of course, we're in Portugal, we study Portuguese. And keep in mind, we speak Urdu and German at home, so they are doing, they are already multilingual, a lot of languages in the mix.
That's great, though. It's really good.
It's really, really good, but we try to sort of focus on which languages we want them to really exceed in or excel in, and which are good to have and nice to have. And so Portuguese, they're learning it at a faster rate than, you know, we are with the parents. But they're doing it in an international setting, which I think is really good. And when it comes to their eventual transition, that's also another reason why we chose an international school that can help manage that transition. Because you've got the leavers, the stayers, and the goers. And in an international school, you need to be able to cater to each child's needs. And that's not something that we found that existed in a very Portuguese environment or Portuguese school, where, of course, everyone is there, knows each other, and has those connections. And if you've never lived abroad, it's really hard for you to understand the new family or to reach out and be like, hey, would you like to have a coffee? Whereas in an international environment, everyone is in the same boat,
right? It's normal.
Yeah, nobody has their families, right? Nobody has lived here forever. Everyone's new or has been there at some point. So you find that the community is a lot more understanding and supportive, and you find that it's easier to build community in that environment.
Great. Okay, well, let's talk about money. You mentioned that international schools can be kind of expensive. But for a family, how much would you recommend a monthly budget? How much money should someone make to live comfortably?
That's a good question. But again, it's so subjective, depending on, you know, your tastes, your preferences, and your lifestyle. But I would say, you know, you definitely have to budget. The things I found the most expensive are housing, especially if you're renting a place. And again, whether it's an apartment or it's a house, we live here in Cascais because we have the opportunity to have a house here with a yard. You know, something you want when you've got 3 kids.
Yes.
You don't want to be stuck in a small, you know, apartment. You need some outside or outdoor space. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's that, right?
Yes, definitely.
So I think that's also ingrained a few preferences in people's mind. And then I think schooling, like I mentioned, is expensive, you know, especially international schooling. So grocery shopping is more affordable. I'd say it's cheaper. So, but I guess given all of those, I would say at least maybe 3,000 euros per month for a family of 5 to be able to afford schooling, housing, and everything else.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So doable, definitely.
Yeah.
And if you're maybe just a single or couple, then maybe you could go a little less. And
if you're single, I think even 1,000 euros would be perfectly doable. I think keep in mind that the Portuguese, you know, wages from a global perspective or a global comparison are really low. So the minimum work, you know, a wage here is really low, and the average salaries are actually quite low, especially if I compare it to any of our previous homes like Copenhagen or even Berlin. You know, so you got to keep everything in context, but then you got to know exactly what you're going to be spending your time and money on. Like if you're going to be, you know, if you want your cheese from Italy and your wine from France, you know, why
do you need your wine from France and Portugal?
Yeah, you don't.
You don't,
right? Maybe in Singapore you do,
yes,
but in Portugal you don't. So you got to be smart about those things because the local produce here is just amazing. And food and veg, I think, is great quality. I mean, I couldn't find mozzarella for the 2 years I lived in Ghana, so I'm just like, every time I see mozzarella in a supermarket here, I'm like, yes. There's you know, no need to hoard it. Like I can come back tomorrow and there'll be still some. So I think you have to adapt a little bit as well. And you know, I think that's what we've done too.
Yeah, definitely something that you keep in mind wherever you are. Absolutely. If you adapt, especially if you adapt as far as food and lifestyle goes, then that will help you save money.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
What would be a couple pieces of advice you would give someone who wants to live this type of expat life, just anywhere, kind of general advice for the expat life?
Oh gosh, so much. Where do I start? I think the first thing I'd say is your attitude is probably the most important thing that is going to either make or break your expat adventure. A lot of people move to a new country expecting it to be more or less like the country they're used to, and then get upset and frustrated when things don't work exactly the way, or the guy who's supposed to come and fix your washing machine doesn't exactly come between 10 and 11 like he had promised, you know, or, you know, your electricity trips out when you're trying to use your microwave and your oven at the same time. Does that happen to you? Because it happens to me here. It's like, I just put the chicken in the oven and wait, what?
Yeah, you have to learn which things can go at the same time and which one, turn that off so I can turn this on.
So I think, you know, you really have to embrace it as an adventure. And my biggest tip, my whole expat philosophy and motto of living this life on the move is that it's going to be messy. And messy is one of those words, Kalie. It could be messy good. It could be messy bad. It could be messy complicated. It could be messy, oh my God, what have I done? It could be so many. And sometimes as an expat, you go through all those emotions, right? One day you meet someone and you're like, yes, that person, she's going to be my friend, you know, like you've just literally met her at the school, you know, a meetup and you've clicked and you're like, oh, I want her for my friend, you know, and the next minute, you know, you're just crying in your coffee cup because you need to fill out a form and you don't know what to do or where to go. So expat life has those ups and downs, and there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the best tip I can give anybody is go in with a realistic mindset. Know you're going to have those good days and those bad days. And know that that's all part of the whole process, right? And don't be so hard on yourself. What you're doing is something amazing and worth celebrating. So even if you celebrate like something small, like getting from A to Z without, you know, freaking out or asking someone for directions, that's great. You figured it out, you know? And I think that's really the best mindset to go in with. That's the biggest thing I'd say. But then there's so many other things like, never say never. Never say you're not going to move to a place because you'll end up moving there. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's we learned this in hindsight, right? To keep an open mind, and sometimes those are the places that end up being our favorite, you know, experiences. So just never say never. And the biggest tip I can give when you're moving, especially with children, is approach moving in a healthy manner. And what I mean by that is acknowledge all the emotions you are going through. If your child, let's say your 5-year-old, is sad to leave home and sad to say goodbye to her best friend, you're not going to just sweep that under the rug and say, oh, don't worry, you're going to make new friends in Portugal. Your job is to help acknowledge the loss that she is facing, because each move involves a loss and a gain, and sometimes many losses and many gains. And the losses can be tangible and the losses can be intangible, so we need to acknowledge that. We need to help our children move in a healthy way, and need to know that, yeah, that's fine. Even mama is really sad. She's got to say goodbye to her friends too. This is normal. And then once you get to a new location, then of course your job is to make sure that your children are adapting, that they are feeling happy. And how you do that, I've got a lot of different tips for that, of course, as well, like saying yes to any invitation that comes your way. Get out there, meet people. And I know that can be especially challenging in COVID times, because I was thinking, like, when you asked me what was one of the challenges you faced in Portugal, the first one was the medical challenge, and the second one was we were in lockdown and we couldn't go out and meet people or build community or form that network. But what I did instead was try to form connections online and connect with people online through different groups and, through different clubs and different ways. And then once lockdown was lifted, I had like a steady stream of people to meet up.
Awesome. Yeah. It's just like every day, right?
Yeah.
Scheduled in.
Yeah. So you got to really put yourself out there. And it can be scary, especially if you're an introvert. I mean, I get it. It's hard to walk into a room where you don't know anybody and really put yourself out there. But I think amazing things happen when you do it. Amazing friendships happen. Amazing opportunities come up. So don't be afraid to take that chance.
Good. Awesome advice. And you're such a pro on all of this, and you talk about these tips. Where can people find these tips and even get in touch with you if they're interested?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I love talking about expat life with anyone who's on this journey. I feel like the more we share, I feel like there's such power in sharing our stories and global storytelling. I love what you guys are doing. I think it's a really good way for people to connect. So I'm very happy to connect with anyone who is on this expat journey, a messy mobile life.
Yes.
You can find me. I write a blog, and it's called andthenwemoved.com, because those are the words I hear out of my mouth every time someone asks us, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, and then we moved to, and then we moved here, and then we moved there. So that's also my handle on social media. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you can just find me at and then we move to, one word. And of course, I write about expat life, and I have written a book on expat life, and it's called This Messy Mobile Life. And it's basically an expat how-to. And it shows you what happens when you embark on this adventure with your family and, live this cross-cultural life. Like, who do you become as a result of all these global experiences? And how does it help to shape you and your family culture? And how does it do things like impact your parenting, for instance? Like, how has it changed you? So it's really interesting, because often we're so busy leading these lives that we don't, we forget to sort of think about and reflect, what the process has been and how we've changed along the way, for good or for bad. So that's what the book is designed to do. It's got conversation starters, and it's a very creative book. So it's all about giving you a toolbox to handle the messy bits of this expat life.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, so then that leads me to the next question. At Expats Everywhere, we believe that living abroad transforms lives. So you touched on it a little earlier. We've talked a bit about it all throughout. But how would you say that living abroad has transformed your lives and your children's lives?
Oh gosh, I love that question. Yeah, I mean, expat life has made our family, literally it's brought our family together. So the 5 of us are born in 5 different countries. I'm born in Pakistan. My husband's born in Germany. We've got 3 kids born in Singapore, Dubai, and Lisbon. So I really hope that you are never stuck behind us in any embassy or any government office, because we are that family that takes the longest, to get anything processed, because it's like to different nationalities and passports, and there's a birth certificate in Chinese and in Arabic and in Portuguese, and it's like, what is going on? So, but yeah, expat life has really made us this mesh of different cultures and identities.
Beautiful.
So home for us is different depending on who you ask, you know, and our sense of belonging is different. So we are this mix, this fusion of East and West, and I think that's the beauty of it, where, you know, I think expat life really helps you to fight for the ideals that you believe in. And for me, those are like tolerance and multiculturalism and diversity, and really being empathetic to people from different backgrounds and hearing their stories. And so that's really how expat life has shaped us. We are this mix and mesh of, you know, fusion of different influences, and that's how we live our life. And of course, it's brought amazing opportunities our way. We have made amazing friendships, incredible friendships, traveled all over the world, and, you know, just really opened up our eyes. And sometimes people will look at us and say, oh, but I feel so bad for you because your kids won't know where they belong. And for me, it's like, no, they belong a little bit everywhere. And I think that's the beauty of it. Instead of giving them just one home, we've given them multiple homes, right?
Sure.
So they can listen to the news in German and feel equally comfortable, or wear shalwar kameez and walk down a street, you know, in Karachi in Pakistan and feel equally comfortable, or go to their international school here in Sintra and learn about the, you know, the Vikings and feel equally comfortable.
Yeah.
So for them, they can relate to different people, you know, different accents, you know, different, just different food, you know, and so I think it's really broadened our whole life, and it's made it so much richer. So even though, you know, it has wreaked havoc on my kitchen appliances, because I just survive on adapters, you know, nothing works without an adapter. And, you know, my bed sheets don't match because they've been bought in different countries, and the bed's been bought in a different country, and nothing really matches. But aside from the havoc that creates on my identity and my homeware, I just love this life because it gives you so much in return. And, you know, it makes you really appreciate the world you live in. And it's such a great thing to do. So we feel very privileged to be able to live this life.
Very cool. Well, Mariam, thanks so much for meeting with me today and chatting a little bit about the expat life.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and if you guys are interested in moving to Portugal, we have an awesome playlist for you right here about the steps to do that. So make sure you check that out. Now let's get moving.